Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Imagine a modern American media executive, right? Like an atheist who regularly eats bacon, hasn't stepped inside a synagogue in decades, yet fights fiercely for secular progressive politics in the corporate boardroom. And then imagine a man just a few miles away in Brooklyn wearing a $5,000 fur hat, using a heavily filtered flip phone, completely severing himself from the modern world to live in a constant state of divine worship. So today we're exploring the extreme opposite ends of Jewish identity, unpacking what it means to be an atheist Jew shaping secular global media, compared to the ultra-fundamentalist Hasidic communities whose entire existence is devoted to interacting with God.
Yeah, and that is really the core of our mission for this deep dive today.
And I,
We're deconstructing two incredibly detailed investigations. So one of them explores Ken LaCourte's media analysis, corporate influence, and the secularization of power. And the other source is Drew Binsky's exploration, taking us right on the ground into the heart of Hasidic Brooklyn. And by putting these two realities side by side, we can really start to understand how culture, history, and specifically the presence, the absolute total absence of God, shape a community and how they influence the entire world around them.
it's just going to be a fascinating exploration into like human psychology and community building. And really quick, before we get too deep into the mechanics of all this, if you like my channel, please subscribe and hit the like button. Okay, so to really understand how this single cultural umbrella can produce such wildly different worldviews, we have to start with a question that sounds like it should have a simple answer, but absolutely doesn't.
Oh, definitely not.
Right. Like, what does it actually mean to be Jewish if you remove God from the equation?
No.
I mean, if your mother is Jewish, but you're a strict atheist who believes the universe is just cold, hard science, are you still part of the religion? Is it like an ethnicity, a culture?
It's such a complex question because it completely shatters the illusion of a monolith, which is, something human beings constantly try to construct. We want clean categories.
Little real boxes.
Exactly. We want everyone in a neat little box. But what the data and the historical analysis from the sources show us is that a distinct identity can absolutely survive the complete loss of theology. And the origins of the American film industry provide probably the most perfect historical case study for this exact phenomenon.
Oh, yeah. The early Hollywood moguls.
Right. When you look at the founders of Paramount, Universal, 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, you're looking at Jewish immigrants who were fleeing intense persecution in Eastern Europe. They arrived in America poor, they were severe outsiders, and importantly, in their public lives, they operated almost entirely as secular businessmen.
Let me push back on that a little bit, though.
Yeah.
Did they operate as secular businessmen because they genuinely lost their faith? Or was it like a calculated survival mechanism? Because from what I understand, they didn't come to America wielding influence.
No, not at all.
They had to build that infrastructure of influence entirely from scratch, right? In a society that wasn't exactly welcoming them with open arms.
It was heavily calculated. It was completely driven by a desperate need for survival and assimilation. I mean, they were trying to sell the ultimate idealized version of the American dream to a massive, diverse public.
Right. They were selling America to Americans.
Exactly. And to do that successfully, they felt they needed to be seen purely as Americans, not as a tribal or religious other. So for the first several decades of Hollywood's golden age, you rarely saw anything overtly Jewish on screen.
Wow. Really, just a total blackout.
Pretty much. There was a deliberate avoidance of Jewish characters, Jewish historical stories, and even Jewish names among the actors they signed. They would change their names. The theology was completely stripped from their public-facing product.
That is fascinating.
Yeah, it really wasn't until the cultural revolutions of the 1960s and 70s that you started to see that specific ethnic and cultural identity reflected openly in the media they produced.
It makes me think of them as these, ultimate cultural camouflage experts. They intentionally embraced this universally appealing secular narrative to thrive.
Yeah.
But if they completely separated their cultural identity from any sort of theistic belief, what is actually tying that network together?
Yeah.
I mean, if God isn't the glue, what is?
The glue becomes the surviving cultural traits, specifically an intense generational emphasis on education, literacy, and textual analysis.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, because for thousands of years, religious Jewish life centered around the Talmud. Right. Endlessly debating, analyzing, and interpreting complex texts.
Right, it's a very analytical tradition.
Exactly. And when a family becomes secular and drops the religious aspect, that deep-seated cultural reverence for analytical thinking doesn't just vanish overnight. It transfers. It transfers into law, into science, into medicine, and into media.
Oh, wow.
And when you look at the statistical outcomes of that cultural transfer, it is staggering. The source points out that this demographic accounts for roughly 22% of all Nobel Prizes ever awarded.
Wait, 22%? That's insane.
It's massive. That is a cultural value system operating at peak efficiency, regardless of whether anyone is attending a synagogue or praying to a deity. And when you combine high-level education with basic human nature, you inevitably get powerful networks.
Which brings up the concept of gatekeeping, right? But I want to be careful here, because when people hear about tight-knit networks building massive media platforms, they immediately jump to the word control.
Oh, of course. The conspiracy theory.
Exactly. It conjures up these cartoonish images of smoke-filled rooms, secret handshakes, and puppet strings. How does this networking actually manifest in reality without it being some grand, coordinated conspiracy?
Well, it manifests through the extremely mundane reality of how human beings hire and mentor people. In early Hollywood and in countless other industries, people hired their friends.
Like, networking works everywhere.
Right. They mentored young professionals who came from their same background or who went to their same universities or who shared their secular, progressive worldview. There is no secret master plan. It's simply the natural architecture of human networks. People gravitate toward what is familiar and comfortable.
Yeah, that's just human nature.
Exactly. But over time, when that happens at the highest levels of a hypervisible industry, it creates an incredibly powerful pipeline. It leads to a massive secular influence over the cultural narrative.
Oh, so if these highly educated, secular, atheistic networks built the foundation of these media platforms, how does that translate to the modern corporate environment? Like, let's look at how corporate power actually functions today. Because if a media owner doesn't literally dictate a single rigid ideology to every employee in a memo, how do they exert influence?
Influence at that scale is rarely wielded through direct action. It's actually wielded through inaction.
Inaction? What do you mean?
It's about the stories that never get pitched. Take Rupert Murdoch's media empire as a prime example of how this mechanic works. The LaCourte source highlights this perfectly. At one point, his company owned over 200 distinct media entities. He owned the notoriously conservative New York Post and simultaneously owned the famously liberal Village Voice.
Wait, I have to stop you there. If Murdoch owns both a hard right paper and a hard left paper, isn't he just a capitalist hedging his financial bets? How does that prove corporate influence over an individual journalist's ideology? Doesn't that actually prove the opposite? That the owner doesn't care about the politics, only the profits?
That is exactly the point, though. The overarching ideology isn't necessarily a political manifesto. The ideology is the protection of the corporation's broader interests.
Ah, okay.
A company of that massive size makes thousands of editorial decisions daily. Murdoch isn't sitting at a giant desk reading every script or approving every headline, but the employees are acutely aware of who signs their paychecks and what that person's global business interests are.
It's like an invisible electric fence for a dog.
Yes. Perfect analogy.
Right, like the boss doesn't actually have to put a leash on the editors or explicitly yell at them.
Yeah.
After a few subtle shocks or watching a colleague get subtly sidelined, the editors learn exactly where the boundary is and they just voluntarily stay inside it.
Precisely. Let's look at the early 2000s, when Murdoch was aggressively trying to expand his satellite television business into the Chinese market. If you were an ambitious editor at one of his papers, pitching a massive investigative series on human rights abuses in China...
Oh, you wouldn't even pitch it.
Exactly. You didn't need an official corporate memo to know that story might jeopardize your boss's multi-billion-dollar expansion. So what happens? You quietly kill the story yourself. You pitch something else. That is how real-world modern media influence operates. It is driven by self-censorship and anticipating the priorities of the person holding power.
Okay, so let's apply that invisible electric fence to the modern landscape, specifically regarding how complex geopolitical issues are covered, like the state of Israel. And just to be super clear to you listening, we're staying strictly impartial here, just reporting what the source analysis reveals about media dynamics. We're not taking a political side.
Right, we're just looking at the mechanics.
Exactly. Because if we look at the mechanics of the media, there is a fascinating paradox playing out right now that completely scrambles the old assumptions.
The landscape has experienced a seismic shift. Historically, particularly in the years following 9/11, American media was generally quite sympathetic to Israel. The prevailing narrative framed it essentially as a small, Western-style democracy continuously surrounded by hostile neighbors.
That was the standard framework for a long time.
Right. But when you analyze the current media ecosystem, that framework has been completely upended.
And this is where the demographics become so incredibly counterintuitive. You have traditional, legacy, mainstream media institutions places with undeniably heavy Jewish executive representation and deeply secular progressive newsrooms. Yet, these are the exact outlets currently providing some of the most intense, unrelenting scrutiny and criticism of Israel.
Yeah, the New York Times, MSNBC, CNN.
Exactly. And in many cases, this scrutiny is being spearheaded by secular Jewish reporters and editors themselves. On the flip side of that coin, you have the populist right-wing media sphere. These platforms have far fewer Jewish executives, yet they are aggressively, full-throatedly defending Israel, practically flying the IDF flag on their broadcasts. So if someone genuinely believes there is a unified, secret religious agenda controlling the media, how on earth do they explain secular Jewish reporters leading the charge against Israel while non-Jewish conservative platforms are its biggest defenders?
They can't explain it, because the premise of a religious agenda in secular media is fundamentally flawed. The synthesis we have to draw here is that politics has entirely trumped identity.
Wow. Politics over identity.
In the secular corporate media world, your political alignment is a far stronger gravitational pull than your ethnic background or your ancestors' religion. The modern liberal media class is deeply shaped by progressive political frameworks. These are academic lenses focusing on power dynamics, colonialism, and global justice.
And those frameworks don't give anyone a pass.
Right, those specific frameworks mandate heavy critique. Meanwhile, the populist right has embraced Israel as a vital symbol of Western values, nationalism, and military strength. In this secular realm, whether you believe in God or just celebrate the cultural traditions takes a complete back seat to the modern American culture war. The atheism or the secularism allows politics to become the new religion.
That is such a wild shift. So we see these assimilated secular networks shedding their theological identity to survive, build influence, and participate in these massive global political frameworks. But if we travel just a few miles away from those corporate media boardrooms, cross the bridge into Brooklyn, we find a community that believes that exact strategy, assimilation, and secularism is absolute suicide.
Oh, it's a completely different planet.
Let's look at South Williamsburg and Borough Park and the ultra-fundamentalist Hasidic communities, because the contrast is just. It's hard to wrap your head around.
It truly is a completely different universe occupying the exact same city. To understand the psychology of the Hasidic community, you have to look back to their origins in 18th century Ukraine. It was founded by a mystic known as the Baal Shem Tov.
Okay, so 1700s Ukraine.
Yeah. He looked at the Judaism of his time and felt it had become entirely too academic, too dry, too focused on elite scholars debating texts. He wanted to democratize the faith and reinvigorate a passionate, emotional, almost ecstatic connection with God. The foundational belief of Hasidism is that your physical body is merely a temporary vessel for your soul.
So the physical world doesn't really matter as much.
Right. Your single, all-consuming purpose on this earth is to reveal godliness in every single mundane action you take.
And the community we see walking the streets of Brooklyn today is largely comprised of the descendants of Holocaust survivors, right? They aren't just practicing a religion. They are actively, meticulously preserving an 1800s Eastern European way of life in the middle of the most modern, chaotic city on Earth.
It's an incredible act of preservation.
Yeah, and the physical manifestations of this rejection of modernity are visually stunning. You see men walking down the street wearing shtreimels, these massive, intricate fur hats that I read they can cost upwards of $5,000.
Oh, easily. And the history behind the shtreimel perfectly encapsulates their ethos of resilience. There's a deep historical narrative that hundreds of years ago in Poland, an anti-Semitic ruler decreed that Jews were forbidden from wearing luxurious fur, with the insulting, humiliating exception of wearing animal tails.
Oh, wow. So it was meant to mock them.
Exactly. The intention was to humiliate them. But the community's response was brilliant. They took those tails, crafted them into these towering, beautiful crowns, and reclaimed the insult as a profound badge of honor. It's a physical manifestation of turning worldly humiliation into divine pride.
That is an amazing piece of history. You also see the men with pays, the long side curls, which is a literal, unyielding adherence to a biblical commandment regarding how to cut one's hair. And for the women, the devotion requires an immense, lifelong commitment to modesty.
Yes, the rules around modesty are very strict.
Right, like 100% of the married Hasidic women in these specific communities wear wigs in public. And many take the extraordinary step of shaving their heads underneath those wigs, ensuring their natural hair, which is considered a private, sensual part of their identity, is completely protected from the secular public eye.
And that extreme separation from the secular world extends into their theology regarding global politics, which brings us back to the concept of Israel, but from a radically different angle than the secular media we talked about earlier.
Oh, right, the Satmar sect.
Yeah, the Satmar sect, which is the dominant Hasidic group in South Williamsburg, is staunchly theologically anti-Zionist. You will not find a single Israeli flag flying in their neighborhood.
Which is a concept that deeply confuses a lot of people outside the community. Like, why would an ultra-Orthodox Jewish community be anti-Israel?
It comes down to a strict, literal interpretation of Jewish law.
Yeah.
Their theology dictates that the Jewish people are in a state of divine exile, and they must wait patiently for the Messiah to arrive and establish a holy Jewish state.
So we can't force it.
Exactly. They believe that human beings taking it upon themselves to establish a secular government using politicians, tanks, and the United Nations, they see that as a direct rebellion against God's timeline.
Wow.
They want to witness literal, undeniable divine intervention, a miracle from the heavens, not a secular geopolitical maneuver. It is a total, uncompromising rejection of secular human intervention in divine matters.
It is just so surreal to me to zoom out and look at this. This one overarching cultural heritage can simultaneously produce the atheist executives running Netflix and engineering global media algorithms. And it can produce people who frequent kosher internet cafes.
The kosher internet cafes are fascinating.
Yeah. And a kosher internet cafe isn't just a place with a rudimentary firewall blocking adult content. It's a facility where the computers are severely restricted, often using specialized community-monitored software to completely sever access to secular news, social media, and non-approved philosophy. It's designed to filter the modern world to protect their souls from secular contamination.
The psychological boundary they've constructed is vital to understand here. For these families who carry the immense generational trauma of the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were eradicated, absolute, uncompromising fundamentalism isn't just about worshiping God. It is a calculated, vital survival mechanism.
Right, it's about not disappearing.
They look at the Hollywood founders we discussed earlier, the ones who hid their Jewishness to blend in and assimilate into American culture. And the Hasidic view is that assimilation is simply a slower form of erasure. They believe that if you blend in, you disappear. To survive as a people, they believe they must remain distinctly, undeniably, and visibly separate.
But we have to ask, what is it actually like to live inside that deeply theistic bubble? Because a system that closed, with walls that high, comes with a profound human cost for those who find themselves at odds with it.
Oh, the pressure inside a closed system like that is immense. The sources delve into the story of Abby Stein, which is heartbreaking. She's a transgender woman who was born into a highly prominent, influential Hasidic family.
And the community did not react well.
Right. No, when she realized she did not fit the strict, unyielding mold of the community and eventually came out, the rejection she faced was absolute and devastating. She experienced people throwing eggs at her on the street. Her own father, who is a respected rabbi, cut off all communication with her.
That's awful.
Yeah, and he reportedly enforced the community's rigid gender hierarchy by stating that women are fundamentally worth less than men. Her experience really lays bare the severe lack of choice. The community provides total support, but only if you conform entirely.
So it's very conditional.
Very. If you step out of line, that same community becomes an incredibly oppressive, isolating force. You are either entirely in, or you are entirely cast out of the only world you have ever known.
It's a terrifying prospect, the threat of total excommunication. But conversely, and this is why exploring this spectrum is so compelling, we also have to look at the profound, almost unimaginable peace and beauty that this level of devotion creates for those who embrace it. Specifically, the observance of Shabbat.
Shabbat is incredible to observe. It's a 25-hour period occurring every single week from Friday sundown to Saturday sundown. And during this time, the secular world and all its anxieties simply cease to exist.
Just a complete pause button.
Exactly. The rules of malacha, or work, are initiated. But it's crucial to understand that work doesn't mean physical exertion. It means altering the physical world in any way. So there is absolutely no technology, no driving cars, no turning on or off electrical lights. You cannot carry items in your pockets outside your home.
The detail that really highlights the depth of this intentionality is the toothbrush.
Oh, the toothbrush rule. Yeah.
You cannot use a regular toothbrush on Shabbat because the act of squeezing water out from between the nylon bristles is technically considered altering the state of the water. which falls under the category of work.
Mm.
They actually have to use specialized rubber-bristled toothbrushes. That level of micro-awareness of your environment is just staggering to a modern brain that is used to, like, mindlessly scrolling through thousands of pieces of information a minute.
And the result of removing all of those daily distractions, of completely pausing the attempt to alter the physical world, is that the human focus shifts entirely inward. It shifts to the family. In this community, getting married at 18 and having 10 to 15 children is the norm.
10 to 15 kids.
Yeah. During Shabbat, these massive families gather for huge, multi-course kosher meals. You have challah bread, slow-cooked cholent stew, potato kugel. For 25 straight hours, they are resting entirely in the presence of God and their loved ones. There's no boss emailing them with an urgent request, no doom scrolling through political outrage on social media.
No anxiety about the secular culture war.
None. It makes you wonder about the trade-offs we all make.
It really does.
Yeah.
Like, I have to ask you, the listener, would you trade the endless freedom, the constant global connection, and a chaotic individualism of our secular world for the guaranteed peace, the tight-knit community safety net, and the massive family support of a Hasidic Shabbat? Even knowing it requires sacrificing your individuality and adhering to a spectacularly strict set of ancient rules.
It is the ultimate human trade-off between freedom and belonging. It is a completely closed loop. You are born into it, you marry young within it, you have a massive family to perpetuate it, and you even speak a language that the outside world nearly wiped off the face of the earth. Yeah, Yiddish lost 5 million speakers during the Holocaust. That was 85% of everyone who spoke it. Yet, if you walk through Borough Park today, Yiddish is thriving. They are reading Yiddish newspapers. They are publishing Yiddish children's books.
It's a revival.
To those inside the bubble, this community is a beautiful, breathing miracle of resilience against a world that tried to destroy them. But to those who don't fit the mold, like Abby Stein, it is undeniably a suffocating system.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We've seen how the overarching concept of Jewish identity is the furthest thing from a simple monolith. I mean, it spans from the completely secular atheist media executives who are navigating modern global politics and corporate self-censorship, all the way across the spectrum to the ultra-fundamentalist Hasidim, who are living a life entirely dictated by 18th century theology and an unyielding commitment to divine law.
And looking at that extreme contrast brings me to a final thought, something to consider about where both of these worlds are heading. The LaCourte source briefly touches on the coming expansion of artificial intelligence in the media universe.
Well, the AI boom.
Right. Think about this. If AI algorithms become the ultimate secular gatekeepers of human connection, invisibly curating everything we see, read, and believe based on our psychological profiles, will the highly networked, secular, atheistic world actually become far more isolated in invisible algorithmic echo chambers than the Hasidic Jews are in their physical geographical neighborhoods.
Oh, wow.
And conversely, how does an ultra-religious community that relies on kosher flip phones and heavy internet filtering survive when AI is no longer just on a screen, but integrated into the very fabric of daily reality, as ubiquitous as electricity or water?
That is the ultimate paradox to leave off on. Are the secular camouflage experts going to end up more trapped and manipulated by their own technology than the fundamentalists who are actively hiding from it? We started this deep dive talking about how much we crave simple answers. We want human identity to be a clean, easily readable X-ray. You're either secular or theistic, assimilated or isolated. But the reality of how we build communities, seek power, and search for meaning is incredibly messy, remarkably resilient, and constantly evolving. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the world around you, and we'll see you next time.